I seek the leave of the House to amend private members' business number 871, standing in my name, in paragraph C, where it states the Modern Slavery Act 2018, New South Wales, was enacted by this Parliament unanimously, to insert the word almost before unanimously. So I seek the leave of the House to do that.
Is the leave granted? May proceed.
Thank you. I'll come to that. The answer is a former member of this House has corresponded with me to remind me that he was a dissenter. So I think that's important. So I move private members' business item 871 as by leave amended in the short format.
Question is that of the member. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Please proceed.
In addressing myself to the motion 871 standing in my name as by leave amended, it essentially sets out the history, the sad history of the Modern Slavery Act. It emerged from a parliamentary inquiry on which Paul Green, the former Christian Democratic member of this House, served, with the Honourable Greg Donnelly here, ironically to my left. And it's the thing is, it was a really important piece of work that they both did, and that the Parliament did, and it inspired a piece of legislation which, despite its many drawbacks, which on our side of the House we felt it was not nearly as robust and strong as it could have been, nevertheless, it was world-leading. It was better than the Commonwealth Act, better than the UK Act, and it was stronger. It was stronger because it had a lower threshold to catch people, and it also had penalties, which the Commonwealth Act doesn't have, and it had a robust supply chain interrogation mechanism necessary to identify and drive out modern slavery. Now, for reasons that have never been adequately explained, this government has failed to have the legislation proclaimed, even though it was the Premier herself who introduced it into the other place. With the exception of the sole dissenter in this place, Dr Phelps, for whom I have great respect as a parliamentarian, he didn't support it and he spoke strongly against it in this House. But political parties, MPs from right across the spectrum, warmly supported this legislation. It had such a foundation of goodwill, inspired, I think, from a very good place, and it hasn't been brought into force and effect. And post-election, the first thing the government did was refer it off to an inquiry. And despite the fact that the inquiry was then armed with the government's own draft amending legislation and a draft regulation, which, assuming you accepted the government's argument that there was a problem, would fully address those problems. But that wasn't good enough for the government. There had to be an inquiry. There was an inquiry, and the inquiry recommended that the legislation commence no later than 1 January 2021. Yep. I brought a motion to this House trying to bring forward that proclamation date to 1 July because that was the feeling that we were getting from the community and from those non-government organisations working in this space, that they wanted an earlier commencement. But the will of this House was to be consistent with the report of the Social Issues Committee and laying down a marker of 1 January 2021. So we have assembled the sad history. We think the government's if the government doesn't proclaim it on 1 January, and there's no reason why it can't, it's had all the inquiries, it's looked into it as much as it wants to. If they wanted to make amendments to the legislation, they can. Now they're saying they're negotiating with the Commonwealth. They've set no deadline for those discussions to come to an end, and they haven't given us any visibility of their consideration. So we think it is a contempt of this place for the government to keep refusing to commence an act that was brought into being with goodwill across the political spectrum. I would urge honourable members to support the motion before the House.